authors edit their own books? And if so, how do you go about it?
So that's the topic of our video today. So keep watching to find out how to self-edit your novel like a pro.
Hi, I'm Rose, the book designer at Alkira Publishing.
And I'm Tahlia, the managing editor at Alkira Publishing.
So, can authors edit their own books or not?
Well, not fully, right? But to a certain extent they can. It's called self-editing. It doesn't take the place of having a professional editor work on your book, though. Rather, it's a step you take before you go to an editor. It's the process of refining your manuscript after revision, but before sending it to an editor.
So how is self-editing different to revising?
Okay, so revising works on the big picture thing. Plot, structure, character, dialogue, world building, themes, and so on. Self-editing zooms in on language, style, grammar, and sentence level clarity. So in order to self-edit, you do need some knowledge about what makes good prose, though. Otherwise, you really have nothing to base your evaluation on. So a book like The Elements of Active Prose is a really good guide to self-editing. I mean, that is what it's all about.
So is self-editing an important step?
Well, it's not necessary, right? You can miss it out because your editor can do that work. But if you've self-edited first, you're saving an editor from having to do that work and so saving on your editing costs.
True, so a good option for a budget-friendly.
Yeah, well, when I wrote this book, my mum said, "You sure you want to publish that?" She said, "If you're giving all your tips away, won't they then not need you?" Yeah, well.
And she did it anyway because she just wants to share that knowledge so much. You can pick up that book at the link in the description.
So saving on your editing costs.
Yeah, that sounds like a good reason to do it. So do you need to have self-edited before you send it to your beta readers?
Well, not necessarily, but if you are going to do it, not necessarily, but if you're going to do it, then it's good to do it before sending it to your beta readers. It's always good to have your book as good as you possibly can. Have it before you get your first feedback, especially if you're nervous about the quality of your work.
So what's the first thing to check when you're self-editing?
Well, if you didn't do it at the revision stage, then start by making sure that the time tracks accurately throughout the book. Create a timeline and check that the references to days, weeks, months make logical sense. It's easy for that to get missed.
And what about at the prose level? Can you give us some tips on what to look for when self-editing? We've got a whole video on that somewhere, don't we?
We have a video on the kind of things you want to avoid in your prose, the mistakes that you want to avoid. So that is definitely a video to watch before you do your self-edit. But there's a few basic things, right? Sure, use your adverbs and adjectives sparingly. Stephen King says not to use adverbs at all. If your writing is descriptive enough, you really don't need adverbs. And if you rely on adverbs, then it means your writing is a bit weak.
An adverb is something that describes a verb, is that right?
Yes? Yes. Like, and they mostly end in ly.
Oh, that's the LYs, yeah.
Yeah, so like slowly, crazily, stupidly, frighteningly, and so on.
Lovingly.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, you try and use active prose so that you show rather than tell. And again, the Elements of Active Prose is an excellent guide for how to do that. And check that your point of view changes are smooth and clear. And that the point of view character's voice sounds natural in both the narration and the dialogue.
So I've also heard of overwriting. So what is that and how do you avoid it?
Ah, yes. Dr. Seuss encapsulated it when he said, "The writer who breeds more words than he needs is making a chore for the reader who reads."
I love Dr. Seuss. Nice.
And that is just such
perfect.
a good, yeah. So to avoid overwriting, you delete unnecessary words and phrases, like qualifiers, words like very, quite, pretty, less, least, rather, somewhat, more, just, indeed, fairly, really, and so on.
Right. So instead of saying I'm really hungry, you'd say I'm hungry.
Yep.
Or I'm starving, because that's...
Yep, I was going to say that, yes.
Yeah.
If the really aspect means a lot, then you'd say I'm starving.
Yeah.
Right, which is much more interesting writing than saying I'm really hungry.
Yeah. And then what about redundancies? That's another term I've heard when it comes to self-editing. So you just delete redundancies?
Yeah.
What are they?
Okay, so they're words that authors sometimes use that really don't add anything other than extra words. Things like past history.
Same thing.
And
Yeah.
tall skyscrapers.
Yeah.
So history is always past and tall.
Skyscrapers are always tall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
that's unnecessary.
those words are redundant. So you delete them.
That's all the tips that come down when the editor's like, your book's really way too long. You need to cut some words out. And then you go in through with a fine-tooth comb and delete them.
Yep.
Yeah. So I remember back when you wrote your first book, one of the things Dad said when he beta read it was that you said the same thing several different ways.
Yes.
And I remember that like more than twice.
I know. It was a real revelation. Oh,
Yeah. You do that in real life as well, so it's fine.
I just want to make sure you get it.
Yeah. So is that something that authors should be looking for at this stage as well?
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. You need to ask if every sentence is moving the story on or is it repeating something you've already covered?
Yeah. I can see why it's two separate things. I've never really got the difference between revising and self-editing before. Revising is much more like overview, structural, moving things around. And then this is much more like nitty-gritty sentence level when you get to self-edit. And I guess you'd also be looking for those weird things like her eyes darted around the room, which gives you a visual of eyes jumping out of someone's head and racing around the room on their own. And like just weird turns of phrases like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Those are called autonomous body parts, right? Which
I can't believe there's a word for it.
There's a word for it, which means you've written parts of the body seemingly operating on their own. Yeah. So eyes behaving as if they're separate to the rest of the body is a common one. So gazes can dart around the room, right? But eyes stay in your head. So her gaze darted around the room is fine.
Right.
But it is something authors often miss.
Yeah.
And I do unfortunately read it a lot and I have a
Yeah.
very vivid imagination. And I cannot read, those sort of things without going, oh my God. It just immediately gives me that visual. Like, oh, the Artemis! Sorry.
I feel like I wouldn't notice some of those things though, because I'd probably just know what the author meant rather than visually. Like,
Yeah. Well,
you're very literal.
Autism. Yes, I am. But also,
That's fair.
these are the fine
Yeah.
points that a good editor will pick up too. I mean, these are just, it's like the techniques of writing.
It's
The
good practice.
It's good practice in writing, yeah. The things that editors know about.
Yeah. So what else can authors cut from their prose to make it stronger?
Well, you look for what's called mitigating phrases, like seemed to or appeared to. Right? They are either like that or not.
Yeah.
Like I can say, Rose appeared to nod her head. Oh, no, she's just nodding her head.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess, because so often you're writing from a character's point of view.
Yes.
It's like anything that you're describing is what that appears to be to them anyway. So it's like...
That's
just
right.
adds uncertainty for no reason.
Yeah, it's a telling.
Yeah, it's telling,
It's
not
telling,
showing.
right? So you're putting a gap between the story and the reader. You're reminding the reader that they're reading.
Yes, which we don't want to do.
No.
No.
So mostly words like appeared to are not necessary, right? And the writing is much more assertive and active when they're cut.
And of course, there's the infamous de-wassing, right?
Yeah, that's what our family calls it. When I go through and I do a search for the to be verbs like was.
To be or not to be.
Yeah, like was, is, and were. So these are very boring and passive verbs. And if we replace them with stronger, more dynamic verbs where possible, it makes the prose just much more engaging, more showing, and less telling. And I think we covered this in the writing things to avoid video.
How much of your job as an editor is just de-wassing?
Well, I try and teach authors to do it themselves.
Right, so it's
But-
the self-editing process.
But still a lot. Yeah. Yeah, but not every was is a problem.
Yeah, you can still use the word was.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And there are instances where it is definitely the correct
Word.
thing to use.
Yeah.
So people tend to think, she's really against to be verbs, but it's not like that. That's the thing with an editor. A good editor knows.
Yeah, you just want to
When-
reduce them because sometimes there's a better way of saying it than with that verb.
You want to get rid of them where they're not needed, where you can make this writing stronger. You're not trying to get rid of all of them.
Yeah, and the point of it is always to be more showing than telling, which is
Yeah.
what was, were, and whatever the other one was tend to lead to, is showing rather than telling. Is that right?
If you use a lot of to be verbs, you will be more telling than showing.
Yeah.
Right? If you replace a to be verb with a more active verb and more interesting verb, then you will be more showing rather than telling.
So, any final advice on self-editing?
Yeah, self-editing is really the part where your deep knowledge of writing craft comes into play. And I think until you've worked with a line editor or a writing coach who can teach you these things, or really studied a book like this, you may not have the experience and knowledge to be able to be very effective at self-editing. It is kind of an advanced skill, you might say. But all writing's a learning process. So I think authors should have a go at it and then invest in a good line editor, especially for your first book, so you'll learn what to look for next time.
Yeah. So for that, you'd need to find an editor that teaches as well as edits, though, right? Like yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I'm a natural teacher, so I just sort of do it automatically. I will leave comments that explain to the author why I've done something.
Yeah. And I guess not all editors necessarily do that. They just do it. Yeah.
Maybe, I really don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I do know that it's good to look for an editor that, and you'll get this through the manuscript appraisal. You'll see how much they can guide you and stuff. Even with this book, authors who've read it, I still find that they'll need help applying the guidelines to their writing until they get the hang of it.
Yeah.
So they'll be able to do it in some places, and in other places they'll miss it.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's easy to be sentence by sentence through your own novel. It could be, you're going to miss things.
practice and persistence is key.
It's all a learning process. That's it for today. Let us know in the comments if you found this helpful. Is there any particular part of self-editing you love or hate or struggle with? And the link to buy the Elements of Active Prose is in the description.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all of that kind of thing. And click the little bell so you'll get notified when we post another video in our Writing Tips series.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.